at the moment, we're joined by Tomas, who's head guide at Awasi, Patagonia, and he's going to take over after I just do a brief introduction. So Patagonia, this is the main lodge. The Awasi Lodge is on a private reserve on the edge of Torres Paine National Park. That's a question that sometimes is asked, are you in the park? For me personally, that's a little bit of a sort of, it's a natural question to ask, but it's a little bit outdated. I think these days it's more important to be sustainable, and to be in the park, you're not actually allowed to construct hotels in the park now. So those that are only there because in another era it was seen as being okay. The park is a protected area that needs to be retained for wildlife, and we need as little footprint there as possible. So Awasi chose a spot on the edge of Torres Paine National Park, overlooking this iconic, incredible view of the towers. And there's a nice story behind the exact location. So they looked at lots of spots. There were several reasons why this one was chosen, be it for the fact that there are some trees around, so it's a bit more of a sheltered spot. But one thing that really clinched the deal was this lovely story that there is, and that's the story of Lady Florence Dixie, who was this British woman who was pretty intrepid for her day and decided to go. She went by boat from the UK to Uruguay and then rode down Argentina, and this was her first stop, her first camp that she set up in Chile as she crossed across from Argentine Patagonia to Chilean. Tomas has a great map in a moment so we can see where that was. She set up camp here, and this top picture is a sketch from her diary, and then you can see the exact view below, and very little has changed. I think that's something that's really magical about Patagonia. It's really somewhere which has been kept in it really hasn't changed with time very much at all. And that's quite magical. I think especially in these days, you can properly step back from your normal life and get completely absorbed into another way of life. We're hoping that people will encourage and want to travel for longer periods of time in the future. And again, we're going to hear in a moment about how many things there are that you can do at Awasi, Patagonia. So these are the individual villas. There are 14 of them. One is a master villa and the others are single. There's no different category. So the idea, the whole concept of Awasi is that each person has their own guide and each person has the first-rate experience. This is the main lodge. One slight misconception that can sometimes happen is that people say, oh, it's very lonely, you have your private guide, you never see anyone else. The thing is, you're not, if you don't want to socialize, you don't have to. You can have your own table, you know, keep a little bit apart from each other, which will means that nothing really has to change in terms of this new era of social distancing. But also there is a lot of camaraderie in the main lodge if people would like to. So the bar at Awasi is really the reception, the hub, the heart, and the barman will create a special cocktail just for the guests. Everything is very much tailor-made around the guests. The idea is that you don't just have one size-fits-all experience, and that's why so much research and time goes into creating a trip for each guest on site. This is one of the individual villas from inside. So you see you have this amazing view. It's incredible just to sleep with the shutters open and enjoy the stars from your bed. Just amazing. And then watch the sun come up in the morning. Again, it's lovely to have a long soak after one of these long hikes if you feel like being active, hiking, biking, riding, and just relax and watch the view. We've had many guests who've seen puma from their hot tub. Again, that's something that you can't guarantee. It's nature, so it depends when they're going, when they're moving. But one person, I'm not sure if she's on this call, has a wonderful photograph of seeing the puma actually on top of her hot tub. So they do come close, and that's the wonder of being in a private reserve. Actually, the team of guides has placed in the past hidden cameras around the reserve, and the idea of that was to try to prove that the nature hasn't been impacted by the building of the lodge. So as I hope you can see, there's a real enthusiasm from the team in sustainability and in protecting nature. And I think to want to live in this part of the world, you really have to have a passion for it. And that really comes through with the team. So here you just have a quick layout of the villas. The master villa has 2 bedrooms. Both of them have views of the towers, but this works very nicely if you have families. Just to note, we do have a limit of 10 years for children. Not so many people actually with younger children think about Patagonia because you have these strong winds and you actually want to be able to get out and do some of those hikes. But we do have excursions for all levels, which Tomas will go into. Another difference with Awasi is just the level of service and gastronomy that's offered. And that isn't replicated at any other properties in the region or indeed in the country. So we have at Awasi a ratio, when you include all of the personnel, of over 5 members of staff per guest. There's a huge amount of attention to detail, and the staff are really, really motivated to try to make each guest stay really memorable and unique to them. So they really go into trying to create a cocktail that might bring a memory from childhood, from something that they might have remembered, or a dish that they particularly like. So if you have guests with particular dietary requirements, Awasi is perfect for any of that, because we're all into the details of each guest. So also picnics, the team does a huge effort trying to make you have this gourmet experience, but in the middle of wilderness. So that's something that's very, very special. Tomas now is going to talk through the whole process of the excursions and give a little bit of background about him as well. So over to you, Tomas.
Thank you, Gabriel. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're doing well. As Gabriel said, my name is Tomás Navarrete, originally from Chile, from the Lake District. I've been working at Awasi 5 years already. I spent 4 years as a guide, and last year I took the lead of the excursion area at Awasi, Patagonia. So I'm sharing my screen now. Okay. So basically, today we are talking about the excursions at Awasi, Patagonia. I'm glad to share a little bit of what we're doing there, and of course to share a bit of Patagonia in general. We are passing through 3 topics. One, I would love you to meet a little bit the team, then kind of the big picture starting to get located at Awasi, the property, the area, and then the excursions in detail, the excursions area. So as Gabriel was saying, at Awasi, you have your own 4x4 car and your own guide, which is key to create tailor-made experience. So let's start with the team. We are a big team, a large team, and we are motivated by the idea to share Patagonia in the most responsible and dynamic way in order to create memorable experience to our guests. And there is as many memorable experience as guests, so it's right there with where our job begins. Getting to know our guests in detail so we can really create this lifetime experience. For that, we are a big team, as I was saying. We are 22 guides plus 4 drivers. I mean that all of the guides are drivers as well, but for some excursion, we need drivers to move the car from an A point to a B point. We are very keen with our guest expectations, and for that we usually work together as a team and not like a lonely guide with the villa. As I was saying, we have guides, drivers, and drivers as well. I really like this picture because you can tell on the right side, that's Josefina, big naturalist, one of the guides, and on the left, you have Jose, he's part of the drivers team. So in one side, you have the knowledge and wildlife, and in the other side, Jose used to work as a gaucho. So he has this life experience, and now we can share both in the pro of the guest. As a guide, all of the guides manage all of the topics that you need to guide in Patagonia: geology, wildlife, flora, culture, history, as all of the activities like hiking, biking, horseback riding, of course. We have a pretty different backgrounds at university, from commercial pilots to engineers, etc. But as they all manage all of the topics, of course, they all have a preference in the topics, and the one they will guide better, they can go deeper. So it's important to us to have this previous information about the guest, so we can match the best guide with the guest preference. As in this picture, we had a wildlife photographer out with Christian, a wildlife expert. Moving forward and getting located to where Awasi is, we will start with this big picture of South America. As you know, Awasi has the 3 lodges in the 3 most extreme ambients of South America. You have Awasi Iguazu in Argentina, Awasi Atacama in the north of Chile, and Awasi Patagonia in the southernmost area of the continent. If you are flying to Patagonia, you have to take an airplane from Chile in Santiago to Patagonia, or in Argentina from Buenos Aires to Patagonia. We are zoomed in the Patagonia map so we can see better. If you fly from Buenos Aires, you have to land in El Calafate, and then you have a 3-hour transfer before you meet your guide, your Awasi guide, of course. If you're flying from Santiago, you land in Punta Arenas, right by the Magellan Strait, and then you have 3-hour transfer before you meet your guide. In high season, that's December, January, and February, you can take a plane to Puerto Natales as well, and you avoid the 3-hour transfer from Punta Arenas to Puerto Natales. In this map, I took away the border between Argentina and Chile, just to make some emphasis in that Patagonia is a shared territory. It's a non-political region, but it has in both sides, Chile and Argentina, common wildlife, common vegetation, and for sure, common culture. So from Puerto Natales, let's think on the Chilean side, from Puerto Natales, you will meet the Awasi guide. And then you still have in between 1.5 hours and 2-hour drive from the town to the lodge. That section is key, because it's in that section where the guide can really get to know for the first time the guest preferences or interest, or read between the line and have a good profile. Reading between the line means we will pay attention in some equipment or in some key question that we will make to get the more information we can. Why? Because with this, we can have a basis to make a good briefing and suggest the best excursions. Having a good briefing is the baseline to have success in the next day excursions as well. Now, let's see the excursion area in detail. Once at the hotel, and after the welcome, of course, the guest will meet with the guide once again in the main lodge. So the guide can explain the map and the excursions area, which is pretty much like this. What you can see now it's the yellow line as the border between Chile and Argentina, and the green line is the national Torres del Paine National Park boundaries. Okay, so it's a huge area of excursion. In common on these areas, you have hiking for all levels, from easy, short, and long and challenging. You can choose between full day excursions in between 8 to 9 hours, or half day excursions in between 3 to 4 hours. But we always suggest to spend the whole day out because distances are pretty big. So you can choose or a full day excursion, or maybe combine 2 half days. The idea is to spend the day out and find a good and nice spot to set a table or have a nice lunch in a lookout. So let's start with zone A. We divided the whole area in 5 different zones to make it easy. Each area has his unique highlight. Okay, so zone A is the farthest one from the hotel. Okay, it's a 2-hour drive, but not a boring drive. On the drive, you cross the whole national park, and you will have the most beautiful views. It's not only about the destination, but the journey. You can combine zone A with zone B or zone C, so you can make it more interesting on the drive. Zone A, being closer to the glaciers, to the southern Patagonian icefield, is the most humid one. Okay, so in this area, it's the only area where you can find, for example, evergreen forest and humid areas like in the picture. But of course, the highlight of this area are the views of Glacier Gray and the lake and the icebergs that sometimes are floating on the lake. This is a picture of the most challenging hike in this area. I'm not digging in every excursion, but I'm talking more in general about each area, okay? To make it more private, we always recommend, and you will hear that many times from me, to start early in the morning. So in that way, we can avoid the crowds. Of course, we will try always to keep off the beaten path trails. Then moving east, we have zone B. Zone B, as you can tell, it's in the middle of the national park. It's the heart of the national park. This area, it's probably the most scenic and most iconic area for pictures. We call the lookout area. It has as well the biggest section of the hydric system of the park. You can see the widest panoramics of the Paine range. Views like that one, for example, or that one. That's a sunrise. Again, being early in the morning with the first light, it's a win-win. You will have better light, less people, and more wildlife. As well, this area houses the known W circuit. It's a very popular hiking circuit in the national park. So it houses the Frenchman's Valley, for example, and the base of the tower. Both are about 20 kilometers and 8-hour excursion. And of course, and again, being early in the morning, you can find this beautiful spot with nobody around where you can have a breakfast or a lunch at noon. Back in the MIG map, you can tell that, let's think from Awasi, where Awasi is moving to the zone A, the landscape changed dramatically. We will not see the main mountains or the main formations that we can see from Awasi that in zone A. That's very important to mention because it's very changeable. So then we have zone Z. Zone Z, it's right between, it's on the east side of the park. It's right between the lodge and the towers. Okay, we will have some picture of the towers. It's about 45 minutes from the lodge. And it has the best panoramics, of course, or one of the best panoramics of the towers. Like that one, like that one. As well, you can find some trails where you can find, sorry, rock paintings. And I put this interesting one because the rock painting itself tell a story about the first natives living with the wildlife. So this area, it's where most of the wildlife is concentrated, okay, nowadays. That's why we call the wildlife area. You can find birds like condors or birds of prey like owls or kestrels. And of course, you can find pumas, which most of the guests are likely to spot pumas. So for pumas, well, in this case, it's not a very often picture. This is a family of 4 cubs and the female. The female is called rupestre after the paintings in Spanish. Rupestre, pinturas rupestres means rock painting. So the territory of this female was around those paintings. So this is not a very often picture. It's difficult to spot pumas, but what we do, it's always to suggest to be out and again early morning with the first light. Pumas and most of the animals are crepuscular, so go out and drive around the hotspot area so you can be on the right time, on the right places, and play your chances. There is no guarantee to see wildlife, of course. That's one way of trying to spot a puma. The other way is to go to a private ranch that manage and has trackers to spot pumas, but for that you need more organization and tell us in advance to organize that. Moving forward, we have Zone D, where Awasi is. Zone D, it's spectacular. It mixes the best views, best panoramics of the towers, but as well with a sense of what Patagonia is, with a sense of the steppe. So it has this vast and open views right in front or a couple of minutes from your villa. You can get views like that one. We are surrounded by the national park and by estancias. So this is a postcard you can get probably many of the days at Awasi. As well, Zone D, where Awasi is, has some lagoons. So it's very good for wildlife as well. It's not just in Zone C, but in Zone D too. You can spot like this amazing picture of Chilean flamingos. That was right like 5 minutes from the lodge, just right there. There's forest, so you can spot birds of forest. But one of the most important things, it's being in the Awasi property, you will see nobody around. It's very private, it's very intimate. So if you are bird watching or you are having a short hike or a long hike like this one, probably you will see nobody. So it's a different sense that in the national park, that it's more touristy. This is the, let's say, the hike of the house. It goes all the way up to the range, Contreras range, where the lodge is, and you can get this amazing view. It's about 3 hours going uphill and 2 going down. This is another view of one of the hikes, like 10 minutes driving from the lodge. So it's more vast and open. It really have a sense of what Patagonia means for us. This picture is great. That I put that one. That's Steve. That was our last guest last season before closing. So Steve is still an avid photographer, and he was having breakfast. It was cloudy, and suddenly the sky break up, and we had these amazing colors on the sky. So we took the car and we drive about 10 minutes from the lodge to this nice spot. So this is the result that we had this morning. We had a blast. Pretty nice picture. So that's one of the highlights to be in Zone D. You can get beautiful places quickly. Moving to the east, and the last but not the least, you have Zone E. Zone E, it's right in the border with Argentina. It's about an hour and a half of scenic drive to get to this valley called the Baguales Valley or the Baguales Range. And this area is just wild. There is no other word to describe it. It's just wild and pristine. It's a private land where Awasi has exclusive access. And again, it's very pristine. It has very few remainings of human being there. Like even, for example, guanacos do not know how to behave in presence of humans. They make nervous and they make these warning noises because they're not used to see us. Again, you will see nobody in this area. You really can feel like an early explorer. In that picture, you can see an outpost, puesto, used by the gauchos to find shelter when they're moving the cattle. And we are allowed to use it for shelter as well, or for having lunch in one of the hikes. More of the views of Baguales, you have colorful lichen, small lagoons, waterfalls, this black basalt range in the back, and these golden slopes covered by Patagonian steppe. More of the views, it's amazing over there. It's really wild and pristine. And for sure, there's always time to have a snack or a breakfast in some area sheltered from the wind. Remember, there's always wind in Patagonia. So as you can tell, it's a very vast area from Zone A on the west to Zone E on the east. And each area is very unique and has their own highlights. As well, in many of the areas, we work with different estancias. It depends on the guest experience where we're going or in the view they have not seen. So we work, usually we are changing, every season we change a little bit, but we're usually working with 3, 4, or 5 different estancias and different zones. So there you can, of course, do horseback ride, half day or full days, share a barbecue or a traditional asado at the estancias, get to know the culture, make a tour in the shearing station, for example, or maybe just pet the gaucho dogs that are around there. So that's pretty much the resume of the excursion at Awasi Patagonia. I'm sure you have questions at this point.
That's fantastic, Tomas. Thank you so much. I'm just going to run through the questions, but firstly, I'm just going to start with one question, which I've just been thinking of as you've been talking, thinking of the answers to, and this is, do you know how Awasi compares to other high-end properties? So I think I'm just going to answer that a little bit from my perspective first, and then Tomas can also say from the ground. I'm a little bit unusual in that I've stayed at all of the properties in the area, all of the high end, and then also quite a few of the lower end ones as well. I've stayed, you mentioned the Explorer Tierra, I've stayed there, both of those and the Singular, before working with Awasi. So very much when on a neutral, you know, not when I was so biased as I am now. But one thing that's really interesting is that you, as Tomas keeps talking, everything is different about Awasi compared to the others. So some of you will have stayed at both, and Chile is very lucky. There are some wonderful products. So there's by no means, it's like some are terrible and others are excellent, but Awasi is really outside the box. So there's this template of hotels in Chile that was started by Explorer, which is the whole group excursion model, where you choose from a selection of 3 normally excursions per day, which are run in minibuses, and you choose 1, 2, or 3, and hopefully you get your first choice, and then you go in a group with about 12 people. So when I was staying at the others, I was always writing, and it was really difficult as a photographer trying to take photographs. You could never, well, you had to get the whole minibus to stop and then open the door and then get out. So in terms of, there are so many things that are different, and the main thing is that with Awasi you have your private experience. So you have your own guide. Well, for my example, in the vehicles that are used at Awasi, you can just wind down the windows and take a photograph. You can go at your pace, and I think one thing that really touches home for me is that most of us fell in love with travel when we were young and free and backpacking, and then you start to do high-end travel, and sometimes everything is so organized and you're always being taken somewhere, you're always on a schedule, and you think, but actually I'm on a schedule all my life in my work and waiting for a meeting and doing this and this. So the idea with Awasi is that it was started by a group of people who wanted to break away from that, who said, when I'm on a holiday, this is my precious time. I want to go where I want and for as long as I want, and to be spontaneous. And so with Awasi, you can be spontaneous. Your guide isn't going to say, oh no, we must go there because that's the schedule. If you're a keen photographer and you see a gaucho herding 1,000 sheep as you're leaving Awasi and you want to stay there for a couple of hours and change your plan, then that's okay, that's up to you. Another one, as Tomas was talking about the estancias at the end, some of these other hotels have beautiful hotel stables that they've created. But that isn't real and true. And with Awasi, it's not a true replica of what you've gone to the end of the world. You've traveled all the way to Santiago and then flown another 3.5 hours and then transferred into the park. You know, what we want to deliver for people is an authentic experience. So as Tomas was saying, you go to these selections of estancias and you ride with the gauchos and you share in a genuine experience of something that these gauchos would be doing if you're there or not. So when Awasi guests don't turn up, they are working on their land, looking after their sheep. So the idea is to authenticity. And then Tomas showed that photo of an outpost. So even to the hotel, the design of the hotel is inspired to give a sense of place by the outposts of Patagonia. So you're not staying in a hotel that could be anywhere, could be in New Zealand, could be anywhere. The idea is that it's inspired by the outposts of Patagonia, built by the wood of Patagonia. So the difference is, it's really not comparable. And the other thing to take note is that the price difference is about $150 per person more per night compared to the other high-end properties in the area. And the amount more that you're getting, we often have people before saying, oh, it's expensive, it's more or less $1,000 per person per night. But afterwards, nobody ever says, where did that money go? You're at the very extreme tip of Chile and you're having gourmet food served in this amazing way by these incredible dynamic waiters, this team that's so dedicated, this guide who has gone through a 2-month, did you say training, Tomas? 2 months training?
2 months, yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So the amount of research that goes into everything is very, very extensive. One thing Tomas also didn't mention, the guides are often different. Not only they stay with Awasi for a long time, but Tomas's background is as a pilot. It's pretty cool. They're really cool guys, he doesn't want to blow his own trumpet about it, but I think that's a pretty fun fact. So these aren't your sort of standard guides who have their script and they just read it and they're just taking you out and they do the same thing again and again. They have a real sense of contact with their clients, and afterwards, often, Tomas, you keep in touch, right? You'll hear from some clients afterwards.
For sure, yeah. With Steve, for example, I receive emails from Steve like every week sharing his pictures. Even now he's in lockdown, is still taking pictures in the backyard.
Yeah, it's amazing. And that reflects on the feedback. So you can check out TripAdvisor if you haven't had guests go to Awasi, and I think you'll probably find if you've had the feedback, it really is to the team's credit. So just to go through some more, Lucy was asking, are the guides always able to meet guests at Pucón or, sorry, Puerto Natales or Punta Arenas, the airport code threw me, sorry, for the transfer? Or do they sometimes have a driver for that transfer and then meet the guide at the lodge?
No, the guides are always able to meet the guest at Puerto Natales. That's our border as guides. Not in Punta Arenas. From Punta Arenas, we have a company that work with us, so we can contact them. But with the Awasi guide, it's always be able in Puerto Natales, always.
And also from the border crossing if they're coming from Argentina.
Yeah, for sure. That's a border town called Cerro Castillo. It's just an hour from the lodge, but for sure. Cerro Castillo, if you're coming from Argentina, or Puerto Natales, if you're coming from Puerto Natales, the Awasi guide will be there.
Yeah, this is a logistical thing, and it's something which we get asked about a lot. To give as Tomas was explaining from the guide's point of view, another thing which is different with Awasi is there's a very extensive questionnaire which guests have to fill in beforehand. Your guide, the guide will be with the client speaking to them, as Tomas was explaining, for that hour and a half, and that's so key for getting to know them. So with other properties, you just go with a group transfer. Awasi, you have a private transfer. Logistically, you can't have the guides going from the lodge to Punta Arenas and back again. It would be a 10-hour round trip, at least 10 hours. And so that would mean we'd need 50% more guides and vehicles. It would be something which just would be very difficult logistically. The other thing is that people come from all over, so it's quite hard to, set up just for that. So we have a third-party company, and the wonderful reservations team will organize that, and it'll be a private transfer from the airport at Punta Arenas to Puerto Natales, where your guide will meet you. So another question, Tomas. How long does it take to get from Zone E from Awasi, Patagonia, from the lodge to Zone E?
Zone E, to the end of the road, it's an hour and a half, but again, it's not a boring hour and a half. So after 40 minutes driving, you will enter the valley, which is scenic itself. And there is so many things to talk about that you don't even realize that it's an hour and a half driving.
And so for Zone E, are you normally doing full or half-day excursions?
There is a half-day excursion. There is an easy hike, about 2 hours, but just driving around and answering another question about the 70-year-old guest, just driving around or stopping at the lookout, it's an experience itself. The landscape, it's so breathtaking that you don't need to do a full day excursion. Of course, if the guest is able to do it, we will recommend to spend the whole day out, because there is so many things to do and see.
Yeah, and so yes, that's another question. So of course Patagonia looks in photographs like it's a destination for really fit people, but say if you have someone who's less mobile or perhaps older, there are plenty of things that you can do with them as well.
Yeah, as well. I mean, there is like short hikes, even like walks, 15-minute walks by the beach or by a trail. There is many lookouts that you really don't need to hike an hour to get the view. And again, just driving around is very, very scenic. And maybe in one day you will cross the whole park, but there is no need to do that. You can spend even driving and just to see a quarter of the park. And there is so many topics. Again, you can go early in the morning to see wildlife. You can talk about geology. You can meet a gaucho friend at the estancia. So yes, there's many options for everyone.
Yeah. So Tomas, when we were talking about this before, you said that you went through some of the excursions and came up with, without repeating any places, how many days did it cover?
Yeah, it was like 1 year ago. It was 14 days of stay.
Yeah.
They really had the chance to see most of the excursion. but still not all of them. And every day they had a new excursion to do with the guide. As
So that
well,
was,
for example, sorry, as well,
no,
for
no,
example, there is some returning guests, and those returning guests are always doing something different. They're staying, for example, 3 years in a row, 5 to 6 full days at the lodge, and they're every time doing a different excursion. Actually, it
could you
started
just go
getting
into
hard for the
detail?
guide.
Yeah,
Yeah,
sorry. No, could you just go into detail with a few more examples? So I think someone's saying that photography and estancias they see, but what are the other things that say on a 5-day quickly? Could you sort of go through what variety you could do of
in a
excursions?
5 day,
Yeah,
you, you have already 5 days if you spend one day per zone, and you will have just a little taste of what every zone is. So you can spend much more, 2 3 days per zone, and there is at least five different options per every zone, plus the estancias.
yeah. Okay, so for example, you spend a day going out to see the glacier, you spend another biking, you spend another, I'm
Horseback
just,
riding,
yeah,
yeah, or wildlife early in the morning. Then you have a nice lunch in a nice spot, and trying to spot wildlife again in the evening.
yeah.
You can,
And
that's
as well
the
as
idea.
the,
You can mix it as the guest wants, as the guest wants, as how it comes better with the forecast weather. So you have like infinite choices, infinite possibilities.
yeah, and in terms of the variety of wildlife, so if you're doing a day where you're more vehicle based, it's a bit more like a sort of safari idea. So of course we have the big cats, which hopefully if you get out early you can try your chances and see if you can see some.
Right?
What else is there to see?
Excuse me again. Last.
What other animals, what other wildlife are the
Well,
highlights?
there is. Let's think. Getting out from Awasi, you will spot right away guanacos. Guanacos are like the wild relatives of the llama or the alpacas present in Patagonia. Rheas, lesser rheas, they look like ostriches. Many birds, birds of prey, condors, of course. Um, what else? Maybe armadillos, foxes. There is two kind of foxes present in Patagonia. So there's a big
Wow.
variety of wildlife that you can spot.
Yeah,
We
there's
actually,
actually,
at the briefing, we have a checklist of flora and wildlife, so we can play to check the checklist.
and what would you say is the average length of stay for guests? We had 14 days, but that's obviously longer. What's the average?
Right. Uh, I would say that 5 to 6. Yeah, 5 to 6
Yeah, perfect.
full
And
days.
we have a minimum stay of 3 nights. But really, when you're encouraging guests, when you're speaking to guests, I think now people are going to want to look into longer stays anyway. But hopefully, this has helped a little bit to show how many regions there are to explore within Torres del Paine. And then there's also, yeah, private access with Awasi into Zoni. And I think one thing that you have to take into account is that on your in day and your out day, you pretty much have a full day's travel, depending where you're going. So if you just do 3 nights, you basically just have 2 full days, which when you're trying to see a variety of things, I think, Tomas, is it right that that can just lead to frustration from guests, that they don't actually really get to see enough for so much travel?
Yeah, absolutely true. I mean, and for everyone, if you are coming for 3 nights, that's just 2 full days out. So it's like, yeah, very small taste of what Patagonia is, and of course you will want more for sure.
Yeah, one thing I just wanted to mention about the transfers is that the team there are operational timeframes for the transfers. This is just, we used to have that open, and logistically that makes it really tricky for changeovers if one person does an early, one person does a late. So just make sure you check when you're booking, because there are several flights that come down. Believe it or not, at the moment, everything will get back going again. And when it does, there are several flights. So just make sure that you're onto a flight which works with the time frames so that they can make the most of their stay and get there in a good time and leave at a good time. Does anyone else have any?
Gabriel? Well, I just wanted to add at the last thing I say that if the guests are coming for 3 nights, I mistake that you only have 2 full days. If the guest want, he can do a half-day excursion the day he's checking in. And of course, if he's leaving late the last morning, we can do another half-day excursion that morning as well. The best time to visit, that depends on your preferences. For me, every season has its own beauty. We usually, in a normal year, we open in October. So from October to the end of November, it's pretty cold. The days are short. Let's say sunrise is about at 8 and sunset it's at 6 average. But it's really cold and you have more chances to have rain or even snow. But there will be nobody in the park, no crowds at all. Then from the end of November until the beginning of the end of February, you will find sunny days, longer days. For example, sunrise, it's about at 5 a.m. and sunset, it's about at 10 to 11. So very long days, mostly sunny, but very windy and very crowded as well. Just the national park area. Of course, Zone D and Zone E, it's private and intimate. And again, we can always try to avoid the crowds and keep off the beaten path trails. And then later February to April, we usually close the hotel by the end of April or beginning of May. It's like at the beginning, less people, but shorter days and more chances to find rain or even snow. So it's up to your preferences. In my opinion, my personal opinion, I really like fall or autumn. So I will say November. For me, it's my favorite one.
You might have seen pictures of the incredible colors in November. It's really beautiful. Everything goes red and orange, just amazing. Anya's asking, please, can you go over the transfer logistics from Calafate? How does the transfer work with the border cross? Could you just explain a little bit when you're coming from Argentina? So they'll have to do a border crossing. We don't do border crossings. It's too hard for a permit and logistically. But when they cross the border, how do guests come from Calafate, El Calafate?
Yeah, the idea is similar. We work with a third-party company, confident company. So the guests will cross the border with that company, and we will be right at the border half an hour before the time, the meeting time, waiting for the guests. And that's an hour drive to the lodge. So we will be right there waiting for them.
For them. Awasi is very much inspired by African safari camps, if anyone sort of sees some parallels. So it's quite a fun experience having your guide in their four-wheel drive waiting for you at the airport or at your border crossing. You don't have to wait for the wider group or anything. It gives quite a different sort of feeling to going and getting a shared minibus transfer. From the beginning, you feel more intrepid, you feel more sort of like an explorer, and that's the whole idea. So I hope that that's been really useful. I don't want to take up too much of everyone's time. Tomas, thank you so much. We've got one more question just come in. Can you please clarify the Zone B where you are versus the zones of Explora Tierra to understand location? Is it the same? Could you go back to the map for a second?
Sure. Yeah, for sure.
Vanessa, just so you know, Explorer is in the park, and that's because they've been open for over 20 years. Now you can't build in the park. They don't, these are the towers that we see now. They see the horns, which are the cuernos, incredible view. It's not the towers, it's the horns. So it's a different side. Tomás will show you. Tierra is outside the park as well. And we'll be able to see where, just at the end of Lake Sarmiento is Tierra.
So yeah, Awasi, the lodge, it's in Zone D. So it's just outside the park, half an hour from the first entrance of the park. So as I was saying, it has this beautiful panoramics and private excursions, plus lagoons and wildlife in the surroundings and the private reserve itself. Tierra Patagonia is right where my mouse is. It's right there. It's just outside the national park by the Lake Sarmiento shore on the east side of Lake Sarmiento. And Explora, it's inside the park in Zone B, right here where my mouse is.
One thing to understand about locations when you're exploring Torres del Paine and Patagonia is that everywhere is close to somewhere and far away from somewhere else, if that makes any sense. So anywhere you're staying, you will want to explore places that are close to you and places that are far away. You know, you stay in Explorer and you will have that, you'll have your immediate zone B, but you will also want to go and explore the other zones. They can't go to zone E, but they'll go to other places within the park. So I definitely stayed at Explorer and been in the car for a couple of hours going to different places. That's just the fact everywhere. If guests are sort of wondering, they feel like they'd like to be in the park, one thing to sort of mention is that there is a lot of footfall in the park. So you will have busfuls of tourists going past, which for Awasi, the whole feeling was wanting to get away from crowds, wanting to really be completely at one with nature. And as I said, be in an environment that hasn't impacted nature. It's very important, the sustainable element. So it just wouldn't work for the Awasi concept to be in the park anyway. And I think actually it's something that we should be educating and encouraging people to understand, rather than sort of tick a box that they think, you know, it's for a valid reason that they don't let hotels construct now in the park. And then yes, Tierra's at the front, basically of the lake. Basically the views are incredible. You have amazing views from pretty much anywhere down there. It's just mind-blowing. Lucy's asking for a date for reopening. So no, we haven't given a date. One difference, Lucy, I would say, is that with Awasi, here we are, everyone's here still, everyone is still being supported by the team, taking this time to learn, to do these webinars, to sort of stretch ourselves in different ways. This is Tomás's first webinar. You know, we're really trying to use this time to make sure any repairs that are needed in the lodges are being done, that we can all sort of, it's a very rare opportunity that you have a bit of time without guests across the company. So the whole team has been kept on, and we're ready for when things pick up. That is the message. At this point, it doesn't really make sense, especially, you know, in the UK, we don't even know when we're able to send people yet. It doesn't make sense to put a date on it and then have to change that date. What we have done is made booking terms and conditions much more flexible. So you just now have to do a deposit of 10% upon booking. And that you can change the dates from any time between now and the end of 2021, and the full balance is only required 30 days before travel. So I'm hoping that now that makes things a little bit easier, because anyone who's interested in booking probably doesn't want to be set to particular dates. So there's no penalty for changing dates. Tomás, just lastly, Pascal is asking a little bit more about the reserve. Could you tell us a bit more about the reserve that Awasi is located on?
Yeah, where the lodge it's located, it's 100 hectares that belongs to Awasi, plus 500 hectares where Awasi has the right to be just us, let's say. As well, we were working with 2 different estancia the last 3 years, having great results in terms of reserve.
So does that help? Yes, where the lodge is located and where you can see the villas dotted across, that is all the Awasi private reserve. And then, as Tomás has said, in the past, there's been a lot of work from the team. The guides are very passionate about observing the nature, observing the pumas. We've had hidden cameras in places, agreements with different estancia owners over the past to be able to monitor the wildlife as closely as possible. So thank you so much for your kind comments, everybody in the chat. Tomás, that's been really, really helpful. And thank you so much for all the work you put in bringing that together.
Thank you all as well.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're
Bye,
welcome.
Gabriel. Thanks.
Such a
Thanks
pleasure.
so much. It was fantastic. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Have a great day.
And you. Thanks, Tomás.